Good morning and welcome to Autism Live. I'm Shannon Penrod and I'm here with Leah Hirschfeld. Yay!
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. Am I your first one on today?
You're the first one on. You're right at the top of the show. Now, normally we show a little thing for Let's Talk Autism with Shannon and Nancy, but Nancy is not with us today, and we're sending her our love, but she's not with us today, and so we're just jumping right in, and we love to have you right at the top of the show. But I just want to pause for just a second and say that there are lots of different ways for you guys to reach out if you have questions, comments, concerns. You might be watching us live right now on Facebook or on YouTube, and you can write in questions right directly there. You could be watching us live on autism-live.com, and there's a place where you can write, there's a chat button, and you can write in there as well. I think that's working again today. I'm not 100% sure, but I think we've had so many problems this week, Leah. So, but also later on, you can, we're a free download on iTunes. You can listen to us on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, or on Deezer. So do check us out in all of those places and feel free to write in. So Leah, how have you been? We haven't seen you in a month.
I'm good. First off, I didn't know that people could access us in all those sorts of different ways. That's very exciting. And
it's all free. It's all free. Yeah. So it's pretty cool. And we are now, people are translating us into different languages, and we're looking at doing more of that. So
that's amazing.
It's a pretty impressive thing. I gotta say, it's what our fans have been doing, not what we've been doing. So that's a fun thing. But tell the viewers about you and what role you play at the Center for Autism and Related Disorders, and why we look forward to having you back as a regular guest.
Well, I very much appreciate that you look forward to it. I can't explain that one. That one just seems luck for me.
You're great. You're great.
Thank you. That's why I come on. I just come on so I get showered with praise. No, but so I'm Leah. I'm a research coordinator here at the Center for Autism and Related Disorders. And so what that means is that I work with our research and development team, which is amazing, like the rest of CARD. And we get this really cool job where we get to answer a bunch of people's questions with empirical research studies, both with research that other people have done, and then also some of the research we do here at CARD. So people can ask us lots of questions. Our clinicians ask us, our parents ask us, our general board and C-suite people, everyone asks different questions, and we work on trying our best to answer those with research and data-driven data points. That was a bad explanation of data, but but yeah,
but I think, I mean, I wonder, like for anyone in a field, like once you reach a certain level and you're working in that field, how you stay updated, the new things that come out. And, do you have to, and we know that people go to conferences and they get continuing education, but just the run-of-the-mill everyday kinds of, because so much research comes out on a regular basis, and how do you get up to date with that? And the truth of the matter is that you guys do that internally for everyone in such a wonderful way, but we love having you come here to tell us.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's always such a highlight, honestly. It's so much fun to be here with you, Shannon, and just it's such a wonderful thing that you do, and Nancy and everyone else. So I'm so thrilled, and I'm so thrilled that you guys enjoy us here. So I have a very cool article that I got like very giddy rereading it this morning. So I took a break from our COVID research. There's lots of COVID research going on, and anyone watching, if you have any questions about anything that's going on with telehealth, which is, remote therapy that's going on, things like that, write in. We can absolutely answer that. But I thought there's been a lot of that, and it'd be nice to maybe just talk about some other stuff that's not pandemic related.
Yeah, that would be a break.
So one of the articles that, there's a journal that I love that's called Autism Research, and it's published by this fantastic group called the International Society for Autism Research, or INSAR. They do a conference every year. This year it's remote. I think actually a bunch of their posters are now online because they transitioned to that kind of platform and whatnot, but super great group, really cutting edge stuff. I think I've come on here before and probably extolled their virtues. But they recently published back in May, so 3 months ago, an article about girls on the autism spectrum disorder. So it's called Recognition of Girls on the Autism Spectrum by Primary School Educators. And it's by Whitlock and her colleagues. Back in the UK, I say back like, I don't know why I say back there, but back in the UK. And it's super interesting. We don't get to see that much research being done on girls because they're not as diagnosed as frequently. And that's what Whitlock and her colleagues want to talk about. They're exploring kind of why girls aren't diagnosed as much. Is it because really girls don't have autism as much? Or is there a gender bias here? And is it something like that? So really interesting. And it was so cool. I've got to tell you, I'm just like, very excited. I have to slow down because I just want to tell you what the results are, but I have to explain why this is important. So, so first off, it's really important that we talk about girls. So girls tend to, and this is all new information to me. I don't know that much about girls diagnosed with autism and things like that, because it does tend to be seen as like a male disorder.
Yeah, it's 4 out of 5 are male versus so it's the 1 out of 5 that's the female.
Absolutely. But so Whitlock and her colleagues are kind of exploring are those true numbers basically?
Right.
Are those accurate numbers? And this tends to be a problem for girls. So they tend to receive their diagnosis later than boys who are diagnosed with autism, even though they report the same age of first concern. So you might have a girl and a boy, and at 15 months, you're like, "Ooh, this isn't looking how kind of I expected." But girls are getting their diagnosis later, which is super interesting. Among girls and boys with similarly high level of autistic traits, girls are less likely to receive an autism diagnosis. And on top of that, the girls that are diagnosed with autism tend to have more autistic traits than boys diagnosed with autism.
Really?
This is all very new to me, Shannon, as well. When I was reading this introduction of this paper, I was like, whoa, I didn't know any of this. So very interesting. And Whitlock and her colleagues kind of draw a possible conclusion that, if girls with autism need to have higher levels of autistic traits, then that might suggest that in order to get a diagnosis, they have to have a more severe autistic difficulties, and things like that. So very interesting that there's this kind of failure here.
Yes.
And so then Whitlock, we're asking why? Well, there seems to be a lack of understanding of how females present autism and what they call a female autism phenotype, which is just basically a very fancy way to say how girls present when they're diagnosed with autism versus the male one, right? So we very much know what male autism phenotype looks like. It's those restrictive, repetitive behaviors. All they want to do is talk about maybe trains or math or outer space and whatnot. But what does that look like with girls? So it's very interesting. Girls present very differently than males sometimes. Not all the times, this is not conclusive, but tend to present differently. So girls with autism tend to show higher social motivation compared to autistic males. So they might appear to be more interested in friendships and other relationships. So for example, they might have one very, very good friend, but not have any others. Where males tend to not have a difficult time getting any kind of friends, right?
Yeah.
So super interesting there. Also, individuals with autism often experience a co-occurring emotional behavioral difficulties. For males, they tend to externalize it, while females might internalize it to something that looks like anxiety or eating disorders, which is a little harder to maybe spot. Super interesting. And then on top of that, those restrictive and repetitive behaviors I just mentioned, in males, we kind of know what those might look like. For females, those might be ones that are more likely to be socially focused and normative, like animals or pop stars, right? So that's fine. That's okay to talk about. But whereas with ones that we see in males, we kind of know what those look like. So super interesting, really very much research needs to be done in this. And Whitlock and their team were amazing. And then the next question is, well, why did you look at primary school educators, right? Well, so Whitlock and her team think that primary school educators, and they make, I think, a fairly compelling argument here, are the gatekeepers to assessment for autism, right? Especially at that early age, at preschool, first grade, kindergarten, and those primary school educators are the ones who a lot of the times are the first ones to raise their hands and say, We need
Yeah.
to seek help within the school. We need to consult the wider educational system. We need to get additional input from additional health professionals. So that's why they're really interested in looking at these primary educators. And now I get to go to the study.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so after all of this, what did Whitlock and her team do? Well, so they recruited almost 289 primary school educators through social media advertisements. And they were pretty loose with who was included. So as long as you had received or were receiving training to teach in a primary school. So they did get about 87% of credentialed teachers, but they also got teaching assistants, teachers that were in training, and they excluded anyone who was in an administrative role, like principals.
Okay.
And then they had their participants read 4 vignettes, 4 little stories, and answer questions based on the content. The vignettes were about fictional characters, and they depicted male autism phenotype, kind of what everyone I think kind of naturally thinks of, the female autism phenotype, which is a little bit different, and then separation anxiety and ADHD. And you might ask, why did you include those? So one of the reasons they included them, I say we, I'm getting so excited about the research, I had nothing to do with it. One of the reasons they included them was to have distractors. So again with that week. So they wanted to make sure that people who were reading these vignettes weren't like, oh, are you guys asking about autism? Because that can skew the results. So they added separation anxiety and ADHD so that they had those distractors. And they did a lot of consulting with teachers and educators and things. And they found that separation anxiety and ADHD were common, I don't want to say disorders, but diagnoses or whatnot that teachers frequently saw as well.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Totally. I just love this study. It's so clean and organized. Like I'm following it, right? Like I got it. You had 4 vignettes, no problem. So after each vignette, respondents were asked to rate the likelihood the child depicted above had the above disorder, and how likely they were to seek additional support. How likely were they to raise their hand and say, let's double check and see what's going on here.
Yeah.
So very straightforward so far. And all they did now after that was they assigned the vignette to a child's name. And they said either the vignette was attached to a Jack or a Chloe, either a male or a female. And they did that with all of those. So that typical male autism phenotype, it was random. You either got that attached to a Jack or a Chloe. Female autism phenotype, you either got a Jack or a Chloe. And that was all they changed, was just the name. And they made sure that all the vignettes had as much as possible gender neutral things. So the child might be really into Harry Potter instead of really into trains or dolls.
Okay.
And that's all they did. They just changed the name. So they also asked participants about personal experience of autism and whatnot. But super, super interesting how they just changed the name. And if you don't mind, I would love to share a visual here because I think it really speaks to it. So can you guys all see that?
We can see that.
Perfect. So this is a figure where they said rated likelihood of autism diagnosis as a function of the vignette. So basically, that first line is the female phenotype with a female name associated. So you got the female phenotype associated to Chloe. That second one, and there's a huge jump, is that same exact female phenotype vignette, that same exact story about that same fictional child, except all they did was say it was a Jack. And so you see here that the rated likelihood of autism by the respondents was, I don't have the exact number right here, but 55%. And then these lines over here are the confidence interval, which just generally means if you did this again, where do we think these would fall?
Got it.
So anywhere between 50 to, or I guess that's 51, probably to about 58%, right? That with that female phenotype and that female name was rated likelihood of autism. You change that name, you just say that that kid is now Jack, same exact kid, but it's just Jack. All of a sudden, this rated likelihood of autism jumps to another plus 10% points. And then on top of that, when you do the male phenotype, which is our quintessential, what we kind of expect description of autism, when you change that and you make that Chloe and Jack, there's almost no difference.
So interesting.
So interesting. So what this is basically, and there's some limitations, we'll get into it. We always talk about the limitations, But one of the takeaways here, right, is that female phenotypes are maybe just not as well known, or again, like we talked about, it's a male disorder. We expect to see it with males, so we're primed when we see all males or that male phenotype that we expect. We know what to look for. But when you have a female with a female presentation, it is going likelihood undiagnosed, or at least much less so than the other genders and the other expectations. Yeah. So super interesting. And I just think it's really cool. And it's such a clean study. It's really it's so clean and so lovely. And I'll talk quickly about the limitations. You know, they also did an amazing job very much lining out their limitations. So they used depictions of hypothetical children rather than real life. And they did estimations, right? They asked the educators how they would respond rather than checking on their actual behavior. They also have some, and I love this point that they put in here. They talk about how it's a binary view of gender. They only did male and female. So further research should incorporate other gender diversity perspectives. But this is really one of the first studies that's coming out like this. So they just kind of wanted to limit that. Also, and I don't know if I agree that this is a limitation. I think this is lovely, but they have it as a limitation was that they talk about, they only looked at primary school teachers. They don't look at middle school and higher education. And they have a pretty diverse group. So they had 87.5% were qualified teachers, but they also had those teaching assistants. They had teachers in training, and they had a varying level of experience. They weren't all, like tenured 40-year plus people. They were anywhere from 1 year, less than a year, to 42 years of educational experience. So it's a very broad category of educators rather than pinpointing exactly, there's a problem in first grade teachers. But really interesting study. And I honestly, again, eye-opening. I've been with CARD, I think, for 3 and some change years. I've been on the research team now for a year plus, and I didn't know much about this, about how females present differently and that phenotype is really different. And when I was reading that vignette, I've got to tell you, they were explaining the female phenotype of this girl with a best friend, but had problems with making friends with the other kids. To me, I wouldn't immediately have been like, but with all the other things that they talk about, it's really eye-opening. It was really interesting.
I gotta say, we've talked before on the show about the girls are less likely to get diagnosed, but the thing that we had always, the thing that everybody always hung their hat on was that it's because girls are so social, which you also touched on, but what's very telling when you look at the graph is same behavior and we change the name to a boy. That's when we go, okay, we've got a problem here. And I think the takeaway for us is that, there's always a big argument. I don't want to say a fight, but an argument during the month of April about, is it Autism Awareness Month, or is it Autism Action Month, or is it autism acceptance? Like, what is the A word that you need to do? And a lot of people go, look, awareness is done. We've crested that. It's time to do something about it. But this reminds us that awareness is not done.
Well, keep going.
Yeah, go ahead. We have work to do. We have work to do.
It's very, and to that point too, I mean, if you read about it in the article, and I skimmed over this, but they also, they used an adult who has autism as someone to talk to also through this. So there's so much awareness and there's so much thought, but clearly this is still very much, 4 and 5 are males. And what does this look like with males? And there's this, and I think appropriately so, right? Like, there's no difference between men and women, which I think is true a lot of the times, but clearly this is presenting very differently in women.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for that research. Where can they find it if they want to look at the whole thing?
So it is on INSAR, that international, and I want to say this right because I always mess this up, International Society for Autism Research. It's on their website in the journal Autism Research. I don't know if this one was open source, meaning that it's access to everyone, so they might have to pay for that to be able to access the full PDF. At the very least, they'll be able to see the abstract. And the journal Autism Research does, and a number of journals do, but Autism Research does a really lovely job giving a high-level abstract for those in the field. And then they do something called a lay abstract. which is 4 or 5 sentences that are written basically for anyone, for parents, for teachers, for anyone and anywhere. It should be very easy to comprehend it, and without that whole scientific jargon of confidence intervals, whatever.
So we've had a question come in, which I would be surprised if you would know the answer to, but it might be something to go hunt down. The question is, do women doctors diagnose more girls than men doctors?
I don't know. And actually, I would be a little surprised if there was research on that, just because, again, I don't think there's a ton, and please don't quote me on this. I say this now on Autism Live and whatnot, but I don't think there's a ton of research being published just yet on girls, because it's 4 out of 5 males, it's a lot harder to find those participants and whatnot. So I don't know if there would be research on that, but it would not be hard to do a study on that. And
interesting.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's a great question.
Good question.
I don't know the answer.
And all research starts with a good question. So, so there you go. There, if you find anything or if you hear anything, let us know about that.
Please.
Wonderful. And if people have further questions for you, where should they contact you?
They can reach us at research@centerforautism.com. That is our general research email. So you could get me, you could get some of our research managers, but we check that email pretty frequently. And ask us anything. It can be about this, and like I said, I don't know how much research out there. We can explain more about this study, or again, COVID is still with us. So if there's anything about COVID, about telehealth, anything like that, send it our way. But I thought this was a really interesting study that was nice to not talk about COVID for a little bit, for 20 minutes. So.
I will tell you that our viewers and I want to know what the research, if any research was done about effective distance learning, not telehealth. I'm talking about school, because right now we are in a poop storm about school and going back to school. And are we putting kids all the way back in school, hybrid, or doing distance learning? And there's a lot of disagreement about it. I'd love to know about places that did distance learning and had it work well.
Let me write that down as I go off camera so I can grab a piece of paper and remember this.
That's what I'd love to know.
Let me write that down. I can tell you, there's a few parts to answer that question. I can follow up with you, and maybe I can come back on, or you can explain it.
Yeah.
There is probably research on that. Distance learning, not necessarily because of the pandemic, but also because distance learning was something that was being done in rural areas.
Yes.
So like Australia, for example, has a ton of children who are in the outback and just can't have access to schools and whatnot. So they do distance learning as a way of life. So there is probably research out there that demonstrates efficacy or not of distance learning, independent of COVID and things like that. There also might be stuff being done because of COVID. And I can also tell you that there is work being done to also show telehealth effectiveness as well. So all of that.
Therapy, absolutely.
Yeah, so I can get back to you about distance learning. I'm sure I can find information about that for you and your viewers.
Yeah, because part of what's happening in the world right now is that I do think that a lot of educators were not educated about distance learning when all of a sudden they had 24 hours to get their classroom moved online. And some people were amazing, and other people went for the least thing that they could do. You know what I mean? And schools across the board didn't have the infrastructure to host the classes. So a lot of schools, not all, but some schools met less often. And this is what the big controversy is about. What we're being told right now is that they have to go back to school because they can't do as many hours distance learning, which I believe to be poppycock. But that's my question. Because no, I mean, like you said, Australia's been doing it. And look, if you can accomplish online what took you 8 hours to do in 6 hours, great. But otherwise, meet for the 8 hours to get the 8 hours worth. I don't know why everybody decided that it needed to be less hours for the kids, because the kids couldn't hang. I just think that's not creative, but that's me. And I'd love to see the research. So there we go. Inquiring minds want to know. But anyway, we adore you, and you are such a light, and we love when you come on here, and we love how excited you get about it.
It's easy to get excited when there's such good research out there.
Well, and that's exciting, because it always makes my heart feel better to know that there's people like you working in the field who like get that excited about things, learning about our kids learning. That just makes my day, honestly. I would just like to clone you. And I know that you're not the only person who gets excited about it. I've been in a room full of people when you pull out a graph and they all lose their minds. And I go, I don't understand you people, but I sure appreciate you. So thank you. And thank you for coming on here and explaining to us in a way that we can understand.
Thank you guys. Shannon, you're so amazing, and your viewers are amazing. And I think all the parents right now are just incredible. So
I agree with
guys.
you. The parents are amazing. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Have a great Friday. Bye, y'all.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Hey, thanks for watching Autism Live. To subscribe, click here. And if you'd like to check out some more of our videos, click here.